The rain had been steady for days, relentless in its downpour, flooding the streets and seeping into the cracks of the old city. From her small, dimly lit apartment, Naomi watched the droplets run down the window like tiny rivers, blurring the view of the world outside. She let out a long, quiet breath and turned back to the stillness of her home, where the ticking of the clock seemed louder than ever. It had been nearly 10 years since her husband, Peter, passed away. 10 years of solitude, of learning to live with the silence that filled the space where his laughter, his voice, and his presence had once been. Her children, Grace and Daniel, had grown and moved far away, too busy with their own lives to visit more than once or twice a year. They called, of course, but those calls felt like fleeting moments in a life otherwise consumed by routine and emptiness. Naomi had her church, though even that had begun to feel like another place where she sat on the sidelines, watching others live their lives. Every Sunday, she would sit in the back pew, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and listen to the prayers, the hymns, and the sermons. She would watch as families arrived together, mothers and fathers guiding their children down the aisles, friends embracing and sharing warm smiles. It was a world she no longer felt part of. Loneliness had become a companion, one she had grown used to, though not one she welcomed. She had been thinking about Peter more often lately. It wasn't just the rain that brought memories of him flooding back. It was the time of year, nearing what would have been their 35th wedding anniversary. In the quiet moments, she would think about the life they had built together, the laughter they had shared, the way he had made even the dullest days seem bright. Without him, the world seemed grayer, quieter. Naomi walked to the small kitchen, the linoleum floor cool beneath her feet. She reached for the kettle, filling it with water to make her evening tea. As she waited for it to boil, her fingers drifted over the cover of her worn Bible, the pages well thumbed from years of reading and rereading. She sat at the kitchen table, her eyes lingering on the verse she had turned to countless times, Psalm 46, verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Naomi closed her eyes and whispered the words aloud, the familiar scripture filling the quiet room like a balm to her soul. Those words had sustained her through Peter's illness, through the dark days after his death, and through the long years of living alone. They were a promise, a reminder that even when she felt most alone, God was with her. But tonight, as she whispered the psalm, the familiar comfort was tinged with a new sadness. The truth was, she didn't just want refuge anymore, she wanted connection. She wanted someone to see her, to speak with her, to share life with her. The ache of loneliness, long ignored, was starting to creep back into her heart. And then, just as she was lost in thought, there was a knock at the door. Naomi started, the sound unexpected in the stillness of her evening. She hadn't had a visitor in weeks, and certainly not at this hour. Rising from her chair, she made her way to the door, hesitating for a moment before opening it. Standing there, soaked from the rain, was a young woman holding a small child in her arms. Her clothes were drenched, and her hair clung to her face in wet strands. The little girl, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, peeked out from beneath her mother's chin, her wide eyes full of curiosity. "Hello," the young woman said, her voice soft and hesitant. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just moved into the apartment next door and we're having some trouble with the electricity. I wasn't sure who else to ask." Naomi blinked, surprised by the woman's appearance and the suddenness of her request. She quickly stepped aside, ushering them in out of the rain. "Come in. You're drenched. Let me get you a towel." The young woman smiled, a hint of relief in her expression as she stepped into the small apartment. Naomi hurried to the bathroom and returned with 2 towels, handing one to the woman and using the other to dry the little girl's damp hair. "Thank you," the woman said, wiping her face and wringing out her hair. "I'm Lydia, by the way, and this is my daughter Amani." Naomi smiled kindly, her heart softening at the sight of the little girl, who now clutched the towel with tiny hands. "It's nice to meet you, Lydia. And you too, Amani." She knelt down to the girl's level and offered a warm smile. "Are you cold, sweetheart? Let's get you warmed up. I'll make some tea." "Oh, you don't have to," Lydia began, but Naomi waved her off. "Nonsense. You're not going back out in this rain just yet. Besides, it's no trouble at all." Naomi busied herself in the kitchen, preparing tea for the three of them, the small kitchen filled with the gentle clink of cups and the soft hiss of the boiling kettle. Lydia sat at the table, Amani now nestled in her lap, her large brown eyes darting around the room as if taking in every detail. Naomi set the cups down on the table and took a seat across from them. "So, you just moved in?" Lydia nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup, her fingers still trembling slightly. "Yes, a few days ago. It's just the two of us. We've been looking for a fresh start." Naomi didn't pry, but she could hear the weariness in Lydia's voice, the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. It was the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. "Well, I'm glad you found this place," Naomi said softly, offering Lydia a reassuring smile. "It's a quiet building, but it's home." Lydia gave a small, grateful smile in return, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you. It's been a difficult few months. Moving here was supposed to make things better, but—" She trailed off, glancing down at Amani, who was now tugging at a loose thread on her blanket. "It's been harder than I thought." Naomi reached across the table and gently placed her hand over Lydia's. "Starting over is never easy, but you're here now, and that's something." Lydia looked at Naomi, her eyes filled with an emotion that was hard to read, something between gratitude and fear. She nodded slowly. "I hope so." The conversation drifted into quiet as Naomi's words hung in the air between them. There was something unspoken but deeply understood between them, a shared experience of hardship, though one older and worn, and the other fresh and raw. Naomi could see the weight Lydia carried, though she didn't know the full story yet. Over the next few weeks, Lydia and Amani became frequent visitors to Naomi's apartment. What had begun as a simple request for help had slowly turned into an unexpected friendship. Lydia, who had been so guarded at first, began to open up bit by bit. Naomi learned that Lydia had left an abusive relationship and had moved to the city to escape her past and build a better life for Amani. But the city, with all its promises of opportunity, had proven to be a much harsher place than Lydia had imagined. The two women grew close, their bond formed not just out of proximity, but out of a shared sense of struggle. Naomi had once been in Lydia's shoes, young, uncertain, trying to hold her family together. Now she found herself in a position to offer the kind of support she had once needed herself. And then there was Amani. The little girl's laughter filled Naomi's once quiet apartment with a joy she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Amani would often toddle around the living room, her tiny footsteps a delightful reminder of the days when Naomi's own children had been young. Though the years had long passed since she had raised her own, Naomi found that the simple act of caring for a child again brought her a deep sense of fulfillment. One evening, after a particularly long day, Lydia sat at Naomi's kitchen table, her head in her hands. "I don't know what I'm going to do, Naomi," Lydia said, her voice strained with exhaustion. "Every day feels like I'm fighting to stay afloat. The bills keep piling up and I can barely afford Amani's daycare." Naomi listened, her heart heavy with empathy. She had watched Lydia work so hard to make a better life for herself and her daughter, but the world seemed determined to push her down. "You're doing the best you can," Naomi said gently, "and that's enough." Lydia shook her head. "But what if it's not? What if I can't give Amani the life she deserves? What if I'm failing her?" Naomi reached across the table and took Lydia's hand in hers. "You're not failing her, Lydia. You're fighting for her, and that makes you a good mother. It's okay to feel overwhelmed, but you don't have to do this alone anymore. You have me and you have God." Lydia wiped at her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "I want to believe that, but sometimes I feel like I'm completely alone, like no matter how hard I try, I can't catch a break. It's just so much." Naomi squeezed Lydia's hand, her own heart aching for the younger woman's struggle. "I know how heavy the burden can feel, but God never leaves us to carry it alone. It may seem impossible right now, but I promise you, there is a way through this. You're stronger than you think." Lydia looked up, her eyes red but her expression softening. "You really think so?" "I know so," Naomi said firmly, "and you don't have to figure it all out tonight. Let's just take it one step at a time." Lydia smiled weakly, grateful for Naomi's steady presence. Naomi had become more than a neighbor. She was like the mother Lydia had never had, offering her comfort and wisdom when she felt the most lost. As time went on, Naomi began to notice a shift in Lydia. Though her struggles were still many, she was slowly beginning to find her footing again. She found a part-time job at a local grocery store, and with Naomi's help, she worked out a plan to budget her money and ensure Amani could stay in daycare. But even as things seemed to improve on the surface, there was still a lingering darkness in Lydia's life that she hadn't shared. One evening, as Naomi sat in her living room reading, there was a loud knock at the door. Startled, she quickly got up to answer it. Lydia stood in the doorway, her face pale, holding a crumpled letter in her shaking hands. "He found us?" Lydia said, her voice trembling. Naomi's heart sank as she saw the fear etched in Lydia's face. She took the letter from her and read it. Lydia's ex-partner had tracked her down, and the letter was filled with veiled threats, demanding to see Amani. Naomi could feel the weight of Lydia's terror in every word. "He can't take her from me, Naomi," Lydia whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't let him near her." Naomi pulled Lydia into the apartment and closed the door behind her. She guided Lydia to the couch and sat beside her, holding her hand as the younger woman cried. "He won't," Naomi said softly. "We won't let him. You've fought too hard to protect Amani, and I'm not going to let anyone take her from you." Lydia looked up at Naomi, her eyes filled with desperation. "But how? What can I do? I don't have the money for lawyers, and I can't keep running." Naomi thought for a moment, then spoke with quiet conviction. "We're going to talk to the authorities. We'll get legal help. There are people who can assist you, Lydia. You don't have to face this alone. And we'll pray for guidance and protection. God is still with you, even in this." Lydia nodded, though the fear still gripped her tightly. "I'm so scared, Naomi." Naomi wrapped her arm around Lydia's shoulders and whispered, "I know, but you're not alone anymore. God is our refuge and strength, remember? He will help us through this." The next few weeks were filled with tense uncertainty. Naomi accompanied Lydia to the police station, where they filed a report and sought advice on how to proceed. Through the help of a local women's shelter, Lydia was connected with a legal aid organization that helped her file for a restraining order against her ex-partner. It was an exhausting process, and though there was some relief in taking action, the fear still lingered, like a shadow over Lydia's life. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar car parked outside, filled her with dread. But Naomi remained by her side, offering support, prayer, and the quiet strength Lydia had come to rely on. One evening, after another long day of legal proceedings and anxious waiting, Naomi sat with Lydia on the couch, their teacups resting on the table in front of them. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Naomi," Lydia said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "You've been here for me in ways I never expected." Naomi smiled gently. "I've just done what anyone should do. You needed help, and I'm glad I could offer it." Lydia shook her head. "No, it's more than that. You've given me hope, Naomi. You've shown me what it means to have faith, even when things feel impossible. Before I met you, I felt so lost, like I was wandering in the dark with no idea where to go. But you've been a light for me, guiding me when I didn't know how to move forward." Naomi felt a lump rise in her throat, touched by Lydia's words. "You've brought something into my life too. For so long, I felt like I was just existing, like my purpose was gone after my children left and Peter passed. But you and Amani, you've brought life back into this apartment. You've reminded me that God's work in us isn't done just because we get older. There's always more to do, more to give. Tears filled Lydia's eyes as she looked at Naomi. You're more than just a neighbor to me, you're family. Naomi's heart swelled with emotion, and she gently squeezed Lydia's hand. You're family to me too. Months passed, and slowly the storm that had overshadowed Lydia's life began to lift. The restraining order was granted, and though the fear hadn't completely disappeared, Lydia started to feel safer. She continued working at the grocery store, and with the help of the women's shelter, she was able to get counseling for the trauma she had endured. Amani was thriving as well, her once shy and quiet demeanor replaced with the bubbly energy of a toddler discovering the world. Naomi's apartment had become a second home for her, and Naomi cherished the time she spent with the little girl. One afternoon, as they sat in the park watching Amani play on the swings, Lydia turned to Naomi with a thoughtful expression. I've been thinking a lot lately, Lydia began, about everything that's happened and about where I am now. For so long I felt like I was doing everything wrong, like I couldn't find my way. But you've shown me how to lean on God, how to trust that even when I don't understand what's happening, He's still there. Naomi smiled, nodding. It's not always easy, but that's the beauty of faith. It doesn't mean we won't have struggles. It just means we don't have to go through them alone. Lydia nodded, her eyes softening. I started praying again. At first it felt strange, like I didn't know how to talk to God anymore. But the more I did it, the more I realized that He's been there all along. I just wasn't paying attention. Naomi placed a hand on Lydia's shoulder. That's a beautiful realization, Lydia. God never leaves us, even when we feel lost. Lydia smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. I'm starting to believe that more and more every day. As the seasons changed, so did Lydia's life. She found a new job, one that paid better and offered more stability. Amani started preschool, and Naomi was there to celebrate each milestone with them. Lydia's ex-partner had not made any further attempts to contact her, and while the fear of his return hadn't entirely disappeared, Lydia felt stronger now, strong enough to face whatever came next. Naomi too had found new life through their friendship. She had been living in quiet solitude for so long, but Lydia and Amani had given her a sense of purpose again. She had rediscovered the joy of caring for others, and through that, she had felt her own faith deepen. One Sunday morning, as they sat together in church, Lydia turned to Naomi and whispered, You know, I never would have made it through all of this without you. Naomi smiled, squeezing Lydia's hand. We both needed each other. God knew what He was doing when He brought us together. Lydia nodded, her heart filled with gratitude. He really is our refuge and strength, isn't He? Yes, Naomi whispered, her eyes shining. He truly is. As the sermon continued, Naomi sat in quiet reflection, feeling the weight of God's presence in her life. She wasn't alone anymore, not spiritually and not in the world. God had brought Lydia and Amani into her life for a reason, and through their friendship, she had found a renewed sense of purpose and peace. For the first time in years, Naomi felt truly at home, in her faith, in her community, and in her life. The end. We hope you have enjoyed this story and have been inspired by it. If you have not yet subscribed to our channel, please do. Also, please like and share with others. It will encourage us to continue to make content like this available to you. Thank you.